Probably the first question, Andrew, is we've got governments mandating that certain people must have vaccines.
Yes.
Are employers limited to making it mandatory for only those, or are there other situations where they can take it upon themselves to say, we expect the people doing these jobs will be vaccinated?
Yes, you're not limited by government order. We'll see through National Cabinet a broadening of those orders through a number of industries. So we've seen it in construction in Victoria, but we're going to see it in manufacturing, I understand, shortly. But the Fair Work Ombudsman has given guidance of 3 different tiers of employees. Some of those have already been mandated. But where someone is a front-facing person who needs to engage with somebody, there is a proper basis for mandating vaccination. And of course, there's a separate issue which isn't about mandating just for public health reasons. It's actually for the inherent requirements of the job. So if I'm a salesperson and I have to go to other people's site, but all those sites require any person entering the site to be double vaccinated, then I'm not able to do my job. So there's 2 different categories. There's mandating for public health and health-related, safety-related issues. And then there's the other one, which is you can't do your job if you don't.
And I guess, Andrew, it's important here to differentiate between an employer's own beliefs and what they have to follow under either a government mandate or under the duty of care for their clientele or their clients.
Yeah, it's entirely different. And one of the difficulties with this issue is it is so polarising and drawing people towards political views about vaccination, freedom of choice. None of those are particularly relevant in employment law, just to be really clear.
Mm-hmm.
In employment law, what we have to do is ascertain the level of risk by the nature of their role. We need to then consult with them after doing that risk assessment process. So you may get Jay to come in and do that risk assessment process. You do that in a consultative manner. If you're exposing that person, that person's family, other people's families, to the risk of infection, and we know it's a very high risk of infection with the Delta variant, and we know it has a high level of fatality, then you're entitled to mandate it, and then you need to change a number of parts of your organisation. You need to have pre-employment rules that people sign off on, not just your Section 41 under the OHS, under the workers' compensation legislation. You need to have a policy that sets out the purpose for it. You need to have a clause in your contract of employment. So they're the things we need to do, but the first step is always to do the risk assessment to determine whether they fall into this category of people who, by not being vaccinated, pose a risk to themselves or others. And the obligations for that are found clearly under safety legislation, Section 21, 22, and their obligation under Section 25. This is in Victoria, and there are identical obligations in every state and territory in Australia.
So, Andrew, where would an organisation sit from a vicarious liability perspective if they failed to have these systems in place and someone, one of their employees, did actually infect someone and that person became gravely ill or died?
Yeah, look, Simon, that's the question that nobody particularly wants to answer, okay? The government has answered about the risks of mandating by providing insurance around side effects. So governmental insurance, the first $5,000 is yours, the rest is theirs, okay? But no government is going to provide any other form of insurance. And if we go to safety law, just to start with, then we can go to the common law afterwards, but let's go to safety law. Safety law says very clearly that you have to do everything that is reasonable and practical to prevent injury or illness to a person who works for you or a third party as a result of the enterprise you're in. Okay? Reasonable practicability says 4 things. 1, what is the hazard? The hazard is infection with COVID. Second, is it a risk? That is it a known risk? And how do you measure that risk? By the frequency and seriousness. Well, we all know what that risk is and we know how serious it is. And we know with the most recent variant, it's not limited to people who are over 80 with physical vulnerability. There's people in their 20s dying. The next thing is control, using the resources of the organisation. Now, there's a limited amount of controls that we can use, and part of the risk analysis is to see whether the government mandated controls of 1.5 metres wearing a mask will be a sufficient control in relation to the nature of the work the person is undertaking. Now, we know in meatworks and a whole lot of places, it's not. So at that stage, you have a state of knowledge that you cannot provide a safe place of work. Now, in Victoria, where there's an implied due diligence obligation, section 144, the officers of that organisation have a knowledge, and they must have it, unlike every other state and territory where it's subjective, they have a knowledge that it can cause death. So can they be prosecuted under primary duties? Easily. Can the officers be prosecuted? Easily. But the big question, the question that people are not talking about is, well, what about workplace or industrial manslaughter? And look at what the elements of that are. Now, under the Crimes Act, if you are grossly negligent and it causes someone's death, you go to jail. To know of a risk and to do nothing about that risk and to permit people to die as a result of you failing to do something when you could have is gross negligence. So the Crimes Act, remember in Colbert's case, the South Australian case, where a truck driver went to jail for 10 years, the regulators don't necessarily use that, but they have. But under our legislation, in Victoria, in Queensland, in the Northern Territory, in the ACT, and now Western Australia, I've got to show that there is a duty that has been breached. That's easy, isn't it? We've talked about it. Very, very easy. I've got to show there is gross negligence. That is an awareness of a risk and not only being disinterested in the nature of the risk, but deliberately failing to do something about it. And it causes death. And importantly, not death in the workplace, just death. Because that's the difference with industrial manslaughter. It goes beyond the workplace. So the Crimes Act might pick up people who are not employees, who they kill, but there's no doubt at all that the WHS states and Victoria will pick up industrial manslaughter for officers who fail to act. Common law, okay? Sorry, I thought you want common law? I just want to stay with safety for a minute, okay? Yep. The common law says that I have to exercise reasonable care to prevent foreseeable injury. Okay, that's the elements of common law negligence. One of the tests of whether you can bring a claim at common law is the remoteness of that risk. So I'm bringing that up because I'm talking about families and members of the community. Now, we've seen in two schools where members of family and members of the community have become infected and very seriously ill because a teacher attended the school, in one case, independently, a child attended the school with a Delta variant. So there is no doubt that the common law will not only protect, protect is not the right word, will not only create a cause of action in relation to the person who is your employee, it will do it in relation to your suppliers, your contractors, the people you attend as the normal stakeholders of business, and it will do the ones downstream, which is their family and community, because you knew of the risk. Does that make sense? Reasonable care is, well, what would I do to do it? If I know that the distancing, if I knew the masks were an insufficient control, then I'm definitely negligent. The issue is criminal law. Am I grossly negligent?
So, Andrew, looking at that thing, we know that the regulator, especially WorkSafe, is really hot on recovering costs. So, if I go into your workplace and my employer has not done the right things and I've infected with COVID, and I infect someone at your end and they become seriously ill, so they're off for months and months and months, they end up with long COVID. Would that also open up revenues then for WorkSafe? So it would be your workers' compensation claim.
Oh yeah, that would recovery claim is a negligence-based claim, so you have to show cause. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, think of it another way, Simon. Let's just get really nasty about it. Okay. Let's go to premium. Okay. Yep. So remember, under all states and territories premium, you can get an erosion of premium where someone returns to work. That's not a problem at all. But not if it was negligence. So the moment you put into it that this is caused, you have this premium risk. So you get someone, they come in, they get very sick. They remain with a dodgy chest afterwards and inclined to get sick again, all because of COVID. Your premium is not going to go and erode down after 5 or 6 months because you fail to take the action. The insurer is going to go, And if someone's put in a negligence claim, your premium is just going to go up and up, isn't it? Mm. So, there's a lot of good money reasons to do this, but there's better people reasons.
So when we look at it, Andrew, and we'll talk about more the policy side later, we hear a lot about rapid antigen testing and whether it's as robust as the normal testing, I don't know yet. But is that something that employers who have their own staff going out to other places should be looking at?
The difficulty is the protocol around rapid antigen testing requires a skilled person to administer it. So, unfortunately, there's been a lot of loose political talk around rapid antigen testing. It's not as simple as that, and it does require somebody with skills to manage and monitor it. So I think those opportunities will arise as we become more flexible in doing it. And the advantage is, yes, you can go and do it. You can have a nurse attend your site to check people before they go out in the morning, sort of thing. You can do all that sort of stuff, and we'll get to that sort of place. But for the moment, it's to be understood that you can't just get up with your rapid antigen test, turn up and go bang. Now, what's happening around the world is you're dialing into your doctor or your health professional when you get there. You're administering the test and they're verifying, and it's going on the system. So do you see the flexibility is coming in? Mm-hmm. It's happening at the moment with the international passports, when particularly people from Britain wish to go overseas and then come back in again. They have to do a rapid antigen test with their doctor online before they come back, and if it's negative, they're allowed back inside without having to quarantine.
Okay. So there is some possibilities, but where Australia's sitting at the moment, there's probably months down the track before.
And there's not an adequate supply at the moment, Simon. So again, once they're talking, you hear various state governments and oppositions ranting about it, but the reality is we don't have much.
Okay. All right. So if we look at policies now, Andrew, the big thing that I guess that we always have to understand is that anyone can write a policy. Is it reasonable? Becomes the test. So, and I'm sure there are a lot of people out there in the past who have learnt the hard way that all because it sounded good to you doesn't mean it's going to stack up when you sit in front of Fair Work. What does, let's keep it in the context of COVID-19, but any time the government mandates something, what does a reasonable policy look like around that?
All right. Well, why don't we do it before the government mandates it, because that's even more interesting, because that's partly what we're talking about today. Can I take you through the process? There's 4 parts to the process. Risk assessment, okay? Application of policy around how the risk assessment will be utilised to the individual. The policy gives rise to a lawful and reasonable direction to be vaccinated. Failure to comply with that without a lawful excuse leads to termination. So they're your 4 elements, aren't they? Why do we have risk assessment? Because the Occupational Health and Safety Act and all awards require, when there is a major change in the way we do something, you must undertake a risk assessment through a consultative mechanism. Now, in this case, everyone's individual circumstances will be different. There will be some people who have actual physical exemptions. That comes to our inherent requirements question down the track, okay? But it may mean we have to quarantine that person and protect them from other people as well, because we have to make reasonable adjustments, because in discrimination law, they have a protected attribute. They have a health-related condition, okay? So just putting all that out there. So the first thing is to go, what do I need to do to put together a risk assessment, okay? Because it's the same thing for the award. The same thing for the policy. I must find the most current health-related information that relates to my industry and the nature of the work that is being undertaken as my factual basis for entering in. So at a high level, what is the policy, process, risk that we know that exists in the current community? And we do that because safety law says it's not a hazard unless it's an identifiable hazard within the industry. Okay, so we've got all that health information there. We've got to actually drill down on industry basis. You can find it. We've had generalised risk assessments done on nearly every industry there is. And as you said, the government has done that in some things like hospitality and others, and will say, no, you must be vaccinated. So do the risk assessment through the consultation process required under safety legislation, the award. And that is, I'll come to you and say, Simon, I'm doing a risk assessment for mandatory vaccination. Here is your position description. Here is where my levels of concerns are. Let's consult about it. And I'm happy for you to have somebody else involved. I don't want to make the decision today. This consultation process is a learning process. I'm going to go through each element of what the risks are and look at what is the appropriate method of controlling those risks. Once I've done that, I'm pretty good, aren't I? I know who's in and who's out. Then I go to the policy and I'll look at what the policy says. And the policy says It repeats all the health-based information that exists as part of a preamble. It says what the intention and purpose is, which is to provide protection for the individuals, families of the individuals in our community by preventing the spread and transmission of COVID through our workplace. And then it gives a lawful and reasonable direction if a person's risk profile is such that they must mandatorily vaccinate. Now, the lawful and reasonable direction under Regulation 107 of the Fair Work Regulations, which defines Section 12 under the Fair Work Act, under Section 25 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, is a lawful and reasonable direction of law which must be complied with. Failure to do that is a fundamental breach of someone's contract and amounts to serious misconduct. So you see you've got the trigger, and the trigger is you then give the lawful and reasonable direction. But hopefully, like in my office and in your office, we've done such good education. We've provided as part of our policy the leave that's necessary to go and take it, the non-accumulating leave that relates to if you have side effects. We've done all the process which encourages people along, and that gives the lawful and reasonable direction reasonableness, because we've done everything beforehand to make it possible.
Okay, yep. So it's not just the policy, Andrew. It is a process around the policy. So look at the construction industry. Now, it has changed, but last week they got told within 7 days all your people must be at least have one vaccination. How do you do your process in less than 7 days? Because obviously they can't wait to get up. How do you do a policy like that in such a constricted time frame?
Well, you're living a lucky life because the government's told you.
Okay.
The short answer is, the other thing I should say about the policy is it requires a credible proof of vaccination. Okay? And in the pack that Nina has prepared, there's two other things, which is the clause in the contract for people coming in, and also the pre-employment declaration, which has the vaccination. So they're the other things that you'd need to have. But the answer is, if the government says you've got to do it, it's a breach of the law not to do it. Okay? So it just means that what would take 2 or 3 weeks will be done in 2 or 3 days. And if people say lack of consultation, you just pointed Dan Andrews and said he's not good at consultation.
Yep.
But I'm consulting the best I can.
Yeah. So that consultation process is obviously reality comes in about that to go, well, how much time did I have for consultation given it was a directive?
Sorry, I just stood on my dog. That squealing noise. Can you say that again, mate?
So when we talk about consultation, obviously that the Fair Work, the courts take into consideration the time frame you had to implement something when they look at what consultation went on.
Yeah, let me use an example. You're about to detonate some sites at a mine site. Okay. You know that's going to happen at 4 o'clock, and it has to happen because that's where the weather and everything is lining up. So the consultation process and that is going to be much shorter. Okay. You're about to go out to sea and you're a naval boat. Okay. Well, the consultation around what you're going to do and how you're going to achieve something based on the pressures of what you need to do will vary based on the level of risk that's there. Similarly, if I'm going into a place to save someone's life who's in a fire, I'm going to do a risk assessment and I'm going to consult, but I'm not going to wait for everyone to burn to death to do it. Okay, so safety law and the common law recognises, and so does awards, that there will be times where you have to commute and reduce that period of time based on the urgency of what is required. And a government order is an urgent thing.
So, Andrew, we talked before about, this is a sensitive topic for a lot of people, and people have varying beliefs. But I remember reading something you wrote a while ago that talked about your beliefs not being a protected attribute.
No. There is protection around particular types of illnesses which have been identified based on the nature of the injection. Okay, there is a religious protection under statute in Victoria. Okay, but there is no protection at all in relation to you having a belief. Just like there's no protection for you saying, "I believe I don't want to work with Simon." Okay, there's no protection for that. You might feel that very strongly, but it's not going to help you a great deal when you're sacked because you have to work with Simon. This is it is a difficult thing because this has been wildly politicised as a freedom issue. And unfortunately, various governments are now starting to adopt the language of freedoms for people and don't understand that we're really, to quote Ghostbusters, mixing the streams a bit here. We need to keep away from words like freedom because what we're talking about here is if you do something because you want to do something and you kill other people, it's a crime. And we're used to that. You're not allowed to shoot guns in the street because it's a crime. Now, you can be free to do it, but you'll go to jail. Public health is a bigger issue than personal freedom. It's the basis of civic society.
There's a statement somewhere, I think it predates the American Constitution. It was, I think, Lafayette and someone else came up with it. Andrew, I'm a bit of a geek sometimes. And it was all about, the freedoms and entitlements. And one of the things that resonated with me that was pretty much your entitlements extend about as far as they do until they start to impact on someone else's entitlements. I guess that's what we're talking about in here, that, yes, we have the right to go outside, we have the right to do all these sort of things, but other people have the right to live. And if us going and doing that is going to impact on that, that becomes an issue.
Yeah, look, I don't find this complex as some people obviously do. What I find laughable is that if you want to go and work with cattle, you have to be injected for Q fever. You want to go and work with people, you can say no. You've got to tell me. You've got to tell me if I want to work with cows, I must be. Nobody complains about that. There's no freedom people hitting Melbourne Parliament on a Saturday morning going, no Q fever, okay? And it'll kill them just as well as COVID will.
And I'll tell you what, too, Andrew, that one hurts a heck of a lot more than the Pfizer vaccine does. I tell you.
Yeah, so I think we can get. We're a very lucky country because we're vaccinated, and our children are safe.
Andrew, for employers, so there'll be, I'll guarantee you out there, a number of smaller employers who feel they're reliant on people in their business, and those people might be saying, well, I'm not going to get it no matter what the government says. If they allow someone who has been mandated that they must be vaccinated to not get that vaccine and they are discovered, what are the penalties to employers for this? Do we know this yet?
No, but look, they'll be in the vicinity of what other ones have been, I suspect, which is in the 10,000 mark. But it depends which state and how strongly it's felt. But they're not the issues. The issues are the broader Crimes Act and occupational health and safety ones, which, industrial manslaughter is 25 million in Victoria. It's a bit more than $10,000.
Yeah, and a bit of jail time.
Yeah, a bit of jail time that goes with it. So I think people have got to get used to the fact that looking at the actual number of penalty units for breach doesn't quite understand what happens. And the other part is that people have to understand this does kill people. This isn't saying who can go into the swimming pool. This is saying I'm going to let this guy in, and if he comes in, my old mother, she's not vaccinated and she's vulnerable, and I am vaccinated, but if I bump into this guy, he brings it in, it might go to my mum, or he may die. And look, we're not here, to deny the fact that part of safety is to protect stupid people doing stupid things. Part of our obligation as an employer is to protect the person who's doing the stupid thing, like the person who jumps on a tine of a forklift and races up and down it. If we see that, we have to stop it. No one doubts we have to do that. But when we see someone in an enterprise where he's at high risk or she is at high risk and we say, oh, we'll let you go without vaccination, it's as good as standing on tines and racing about a warehouse. It's the same thing. It is the same obligation on the employer.
I guess that's, Andrew, what it breaks down to here. We can have our own beliefs, but at the end of the day, we also have laws, legislations that we have to follow. And in any aspect of our life, if our beliefs go against that, we put not just ourselves, but other people in jeopardy.
I think that's right.
You need a driver's license to drive a car.
Yeah.
We don't, my son's 3. As much as my parents love to tell the story of me crashing through a brand new gate my father built when I was about 2 years of age, I'm not letting my child drive my car.
No, and well done you. But I guess, look, we shouldn't concentrate that on too much because I understand it causes some antipathy. I think we just need to get back to risk. It's the area that you and I work in. It's an easier conversation. And the reality is, if after you do a risk assessment, the only appropriate control and the mixture of controls you have that can bring the level of safety you need is mandating vaccination, then you must do it. It's simple.
And it risks for an individual. So you hear people out there saying, well, I'll fake a certificate or I'll just tell my employer I'm vaccinated. If a worker did that and the employer did their best to identify, yes, look, they've given me documentation that appears real, but that worker was not vaccinated and then they infected someone, that person got reasonable or died, what could the actual implications to that individual be?
Well, let's just talk about their employment because that's the easy part. It is a breach of good faith and fidelity. Fidelity means honesty, to lie. And the more serious the lie, the more serious the breach. So a breach of that sort would lead to summary dismissal. The moment you became aware of it, you would be allowed to summarily terminate the person, and there could be no argument in the Fair Work Commission about it. Because dishonesty about an issue which goes to the lives of others is serious misconduct. Now, could they be charged with other things? Yes, they can be charged under Crimes Act issues for doing it as well. And as I said, potentially they can end up with a manslaughter charge against them where they have deliberately acted in a grossly negligent and dishonest manner and caused the death of another person. So those people do have a level of risk that sits around them, and they've clearly breached Section 25 of the safety legislation. That's a big fine. They may have recklessly endangered somebody at work. Okay, 5 years jail. So there's a lot there. There's a lot of tools there to say to people, this is the pathway. Don't worry about the $3,000 or the $10,000 worth of penalty units. If you do something dishonestly and it causes the death of somebody else, you're at a lot of risk. And I don't doubt we're going to see people prosecuted, as happened recently with a person who refused to self-isolate and got put in jail for 6 months. Australian courts are going to be contemptuous of people who breach COVID rules given the level of risk that attaches to it.
And so what we're saying, Andrew, is employers have, I guess, that duty of care, duty to make everything as safe as they can. If people breach that, then employers need to act accordingly.
Immediately and accordingly.
Yeah,
there can be no condonation. One of the risks is if you let one person do it but you try and punish another, you can't, because the doctrine of condonation says you can't punish that which you permit. But we've got to stay back in this risk process of saying, look, what is the health risk of this occurring? And it's really profound. And it's profound not just for employees, it's profound for their families and our community. And as employers, we just must understand what our responsibility is.
And I guess, Andrew, the sooner we all get our heads around that, the sooner the country opens up for everybody.
Oh, it does. And this is the business risk that we haven't talked about. But while people continue to not get vaccinated, seek to frustrate a mandatory vaccination process, which is based on good risk analysis, while they do that, businesses will become tier 1 sites and be closed. People will lose their jobs. People will lose money. People will lose their livelihood. People will lose their quality of life. The issues of once you move beyond the actual public health are pretty frightening as well. And Australia is moving into a recession. And the reason it's moving into a recession is we've had a whole lot of people who haven't got vaccinated and have continued to move around the community in breach of orders and expose other people, including their family, to the risk of infection. And some of those people have got that infection and they've got very sick, and some have died. And the cost associated with that in our public health system is just terrifying. Okay. And if you look at, you want to go in and have elective surgery in New South Wales, give it your best shot. You won't get it. It is damaging our health system. It is damaging our health workers. This is a problem which is significantly bigger than having a smoke with a bloke and saying, oh, you can come inside, don't worry about it. I won't say anything. Much bigger than that.
Andrew, anything else you'd like to add from, I guess, a legal perspective here on what, maybe something that employers are missing or that they need to focus on and do?
I think the key thing that people miss is governments haven't been courageous in mandating. Okay, they've done stuff by stealth. So they've introduced the insurance that sits behind people being vaccinated. The Fair Work Ombudsman, without notification of anyone, changed their directions to say it's not so much an industry base, it's a person's jobs base. Our governments are most reluctant to have bad news about them. But the issue for us as employers, just based on safety law, is always, what is the risk? How do I manage that risk? And mandatory vaccination is just one of a number of controls. So it shouldn't be the one you reach for first because of the seriousness of it. It's the one you go to last. Because, yes, it is tough to say to someone you must be vaccinated. Now, you and I know not to get vaccinated places you and your family at risk. We know that, okay? But it's still a choice people have. So when we get to mandatory vaccination, you must have a compelling risk assessment that tells you that is the right thing to do. And if you find that's the case, then have a pre-employment checklist that makes sure that everyone knows if you want to come and work for Simon, you're going to have to be vaccinated. Have the disclosure statement before you start saying you've done it. Because if you haven't, Toll and Ellis and all those cases say where you make an untrue declaration prior to, you can terminate the moment you find out about it. Put a term in your contract that does it. Create the policy that's right. Have the risk framework set up so that you can do it individually. Be skilled in the manner in which you do it. Have the lawful and reasonable direction letters set up, ready to go. It's a pack, okay?
So, Andrew, you talked before about some collateral that FCW have already created. What's in that collateral that you've got?
Exactly what I just described to you, including the names of the people you can call to. So there is I don't know what the price is off the top of my head, Simon, but there's a fixed price for that, which has advice sitting on the front, which is crafted to the nature of your organisation, looking at awards and other variables that sit there. There's Karen Lou's name from the consulting business to assist you with the risk analysis, and there's Nina's name, who is our expert in all things around mandating vaccinations, who can talk you around the law and how to do stuff and how you roll it out and what consultation looks like in the circumstance of your case. So, and I'm sure we're not the only person doing it, but the most important thing is all those elements I've talked about you need. If you want to vaccinate, you must have a checklist. You must have the employment disclosure, which has Section 41 of the WRC, or in Queensland, it's you must have a term in your contract when you're offering people. You must have the policy, the risk assessment process, lawful and reasonable direction. If you don't have those, you're missing pieces of the puzzle. Yeah. And the advice pulls all that together.
Yeah, we'll get the links from you to put in the comments for when these videos go out. So if people want to follow up with you to obtain this information, they just click that and go through to your site.
Sounds good, man.
Excellent. Anything else you want to add, Andrew?
No.
Excellent. Thanks, Andrew.